Ryan Donato might be available come the trade deadline, but do the New Jersey Devils have enough assets to work with when it comes to negotiating a trade? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here at the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Chalky Play Announcer, Devils Rider Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. It's the final episode of February, and the trade deadline is right around the corner. Don't look now, but March 7th will be here before we know it. And a lot of people are pushing for Tom Fitzgerald to make a move to help the Devils. But I said in the previous episode that the well is running a little dry in terms of tradable assets that the Devils can work with. That's going to be the main focus in the first segment. We'll talk about the circumstances once again involving the Devils, some players with certain clauses, and how the Devils might approach the deadline. Then in the second segment, we're going to do a silly season discussion. Third time this week, it involves Ryan Donato and his situation with the Blackhawks. Then in the third and final segment, I will give my final verdict on Mr. Donato and as to whether or not do I want the Devils to pursue him, because he's actually having a good year with the Blackhawks, and I think more people need to bring it into the light. Or not, because maybe he'll fall under the radar and that could work into the favor of the Devils, but that will be for the third and final segment. Let's talk about the Devils and the trade deadline, because the well is running a little dry. What do I mean by that? Well, before we talk about hypothetical players that could see their names brought up in trade discussions, let's look at some players with certain clauses on their contracts. So, no movement clause. Timo Meier, Jesper Bratt, Andre Palat, Dougie Hamilton, and Jacob Markstrom. Players with a no trade clause. Eric Haula, Brett Pesce, Brendan Dillon. Modified no trade clause. Nico Hischier, Jonas Siegenthaler. Keep in mind, he was recently placed on the LTIR, so that could free up some cap space for the Devils. Stefan Noesen and Jake Allen. The Devils do not have a first-round pick in this year's draft due to the Jacob Markstrom trade. They have 3 second-round picks, and honestly, that might be their most prized possession when it comes to trade talks. I said it in the previous episode, and I'm going to say it again. The Devils are stuck right now. When you have certain players signed to long-term deals with clauses added onto their contracts, it makes things all that more difficult when it comes to trade discussions, because a lot of people were saying, like, maybe Eric Haula should be dealt away. He's not really having a good year, but he has a no trade clause. People, for some reason, are divided when it comes to Jesper Bratt. He's not going anywhere. Timo Meier's not going anywhere. So your idea of the Devils including Meier or Bratt in a certain package for a player like Brady Tkachuk, that's just going to have to remain in the video games, because that is complete fantasy, not going to happen. And I know an argument that is going to be brought up is, well, you can waive your no trade clause or your no movement clause. A good example would be the New York Rangers, because Jacob Trouba, he waived his no trade clause in order to be dealt to Anaheim, and JT Miller, he waived his no movement clause in order to be dealt back to the Rangers from the Canucks. But I don't see anybody on the Devils waiving their no trade clause or their no movement clause. A good example would be Eric Haula. There's no reason for Haula to waive his no trade clause, because he wanted stability. He loves New Jersey. He loves the guys in the locker room after his first year with the Devils. He was nearly in tears during his exit interview. He said that the guys were like his family. He's never been a part of a team like this. Immediately after the season ended, he went to Tom Fitzgerald's office and said, let's work on an extension. And I love Erik Haula. I really hope he turns it around because I think he has done a lot of good for the Devils. But there's no way Erik Haula is going to waive his no trade clause. Just no way, because he's played on so many different teams. He wanted that stability. He loves the guys in the locker room. He loves the Devils. That ain't happening. Pesce, Dillon, and Nason, it's way too early in their contracts to want to move somewhere else. And Meyer, Hamilton, and Palat, they're being paid handsomely by the Devils, and they have decent-sized roles, and I don't think they're going to try to put that into jeopardy. So, yes, I get it. I understand that it is possible to waive your no movement clause or your no trade clause, but I really don't see anyone on the Devils doing that in order to be dealt to like a mediocre team, because the Devils are still a playoff team. Why would you waive your no trade clause to go to a team like the Blackhawks that is clearly rebuilding, or a team like the Penguins that is also clearly rebuilding? The Devils are in a playoff position, whether they're the top three in the Metro or they get a wild card. That's just how things are laid out. So the Devils don't really have much wiggle room to work with. And when we look at players that don't have any clauses added on to their contracts, you got someone like Dawson Mercer, but honestly, you need someone to add alongside Mercer. What do I mean by that? Well, I know a lot of people want to see Dawson Mercer get dealt away, and he is one of the more valuable assets that is tradable on the Devils roster. But the thing is, when I think of Mercer, I think of him as one of the better contributors on the Devils' bottom six. Whether you want to accept it or not, but who's more likely to rack up a point? Dawson Mercer or Paul Cotter, Tomas Tatar, Nathan Bastian, Curtis Lazar? It's going to be Dawson Mercer all day, every day. That's just the fact of the matter. So I think you need to add someone who's similar to Dawson Mercer, someone who might not get a point every single game, but someone who can contribute. That's all I'm asking for, because I trust Dawson Mercer over some of the other players I just listed. So find someone to add alongside Mercer. Don't make him the tradable asset. If you trade away Dawson Mercer and you get like a 1 or 2 year rental, that's not really going to help you in the grand scheme of things. And the other assets like Tomas Tatar, Nathan Bastian, Curtis McDermott, Curtis Lazar, Justin Dowling, Paul Cotter, they're going to give you little to nothing in the market. Like, who wants Tomas Tatar for a prized possession? And unfortunately, the Devils don't have a first-round draft pick to work with, like I just mentioned. So a lot of people are saying, like, why is Fitzy taking so long to make a deal? Well, here's the ugly truth. The Devils aren't really in a good position to make a trade because they have little to no tradable assets. You can't really trade away your youth for a rental. That's not really a good investment, especially since the Devils are not really legitimate contenders. I don't think anybody is picking the Devils to hoist the Stanley Cup at the end of the year. So what's the point of trading away someone like Mercer, Nemitz, Casey, Gritziuk, whomever, for a player that's only going to be with the Devils for like a year, leaving free agency, and the Devils don't have a cup, and they just parted ways with a player that really can help them in the future? That's something you also have to think about. And my colleague over at Pucks and Pitchforks, Joseph Stanislaw, aka Jersey Joe, he wrote an article about it, and I agree with them, which is you can't just think short-term solution. You got to think of everything as an investment. So if the Devils part ways with one of their younger assets for a 1-year veteran rental, that's not really going to help in the long run. That's a terrible investment. So Fitzy's got to find the perfect balance of how do you help now and also not affect the future. So I think the more valuable assets that the Devils have are their 3 second round picks, because I'm not really willing to part ways with Mercer or Nemitz unless you're getting a top-notch all-star player that you can't say no to. And no, it's not going to be Brady Tkachuk. Unfortunately, there's little to no wiggle room. So when people are saying like, well, you could try to package Curtis Lazar, Tomas Tatar, Curtis McDermott, whoever, if you include all 3 of those players in a package, what are you going to get? Maybe a late draft pick if you're lucky. No one's going to want Tomas Tatar, especially since he's signed for this season. Same with Curtis Lazar. They're going to become unrestricted free agents at the conclusion of this year. This is just the hand that's being dealt to the Devils right now, which is they don't have many tradable assets. They don't have a first round pick, and the market isn't really hot for the time being. The Devils are looking to buy low, and you're going to have to look at rentals. If you really want the Devils to improve their bottom 6, here's just what you're going to have to accept, which is a rental, and then you try to fix this issue come the offseason. Similar to what they did with their goaltending situation last year. They took a flyer on Jake Allen and Kaapo Kähkönen, and it worked out for them. Jake Allen is having a good year, and Kähkönen was better than Vitek Vanecek and Akira Schmidt, I would argue. So yeah, this is what the Devils are dealing with. I know it's not what you want to hear. And I spoke to Fitzgerald last month. I said, are the phone lines keeping you busy? And he said, the phone lines are dry for the time being. I do believe that the Devils will get a trade done, but you're going to have to be patient, and you're just going to have to accept the fact that it's not going to be a game changer. And honestly, I also wouldn't be surprised if the Devils made no moves. If Fitzy just said, we tried our best, but we couldn't find a good piece, because you got to think about it in the short term. You got to think about it in the long term. The Devils are a playoff team, but that is completely different from being a championship contending team. They're not competing for the championship this year. Why would they sacrifice their future for a rental that might not really pan out in the long run? So those are my thoughts heading into the trade deadline and also into the month of March. And before we continue and talk silly season once again, let me tell you guys about Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on every other site. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've actually used Indeed before to get myself some play-by-play gigs. I use it to this very day. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support my show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I had a completely different thing planned for today's episode. I was going to focus on Seattle Kraken players that the Devils could possibly pursue. One name that came to mind was Yanni Gourde, but Gourde's point production has gone down the past couple of seasons. He's dealing with an injury. He's been sidelined since January 2nd. He recently got sports hernia surgery. He was on the LTIR for the Kraken. I don't think the Devils are going to take a chance on a player that's missed significant time, whose point production has gone down the past few years. I do think Gourde is a good player, but once again, similar to what I said in the first segment, you got to think about the long-term plan. Maybe the Devils can get him at a cheap price and it won't hurt him, but I don't think Yanni Gourde is the answer. I do like Jared McCann, but he is owed $5 million this season, and he signed for 2 more seasons after this one. So he might be a little too expensive. And another name that I saw float around was Jordan Eberle, but the Kraken are not going to trade away their captain. I just don't think that's going to happen. So what did I do? I did some more research, and courtesy of my colleague Marcy Rubin of Pucks and Pitchforks, she put out an article on a former Kraken player, Ryan Donato, who is currently playing for the Chicago Blackhawks. Could he be an option for the Devils? He's in the final year of his 2-year contract. He has a cap hit of $2 million, and he might be a rental, but he would be a good rental, and maybe the Devils can get him at a cheap price. This year for the Blackhawks, he has appeared in 56 games. He has 19 goals, which leads the Blackhawks, 20 assists, third on the Blackhawks, 39 points, also third on the team, 10 power play points, a face-off win percentage of 45.7%, ninth on the team, 93 hits, third on the team, 16 takeaways, fifth on the team, a 3.4 offensive point share rating, first on the team, 6.1 point share rating, fourth on the team, and a 30.3 expected goals for rating, fourth on the team. He's a versatile forward with a scoring touch. His skating is only average. He lacks the extra gear that would make him a really dangerous scorer, but honestly, he does pass the eye test. And like I said, he's in the final year of his contract, and maybe the Devils can get him at a cheap price. Going back to what I said in the first segment, the Devils have 3 second-round picks, and I think they are focused on trying to make a deep playoff run. I have my doubts, but maybe they can get someone like Ryan Donato to really help them out, and you can add him alongside Mercer. So the asking price might be low for the Blackhawks. You can throw in maybe 1 or 2 of those second-round picks, and that can really help you for this season, but you're going to have to accept reality. Donato would just be a rental for this year, and I think he's going to see a pay increase once he hits free agency. I think Donato is a good fit for the Devils because he's exactly what the Devils are looking for. Someone who can contribute on the bottom 6, someone who can score more consistently than some of their other options. You still have Dawson Mercer. I don't think the Devils would part ways with Mercer in this circumstance. I do like Ryan Donato, and I think the Devils should definitely entertain the thought of adding him to the roster. So here's my final verdict. Should the Devils get Ryan Donato from the Blackhawks? I'm going to say yes. They should definitely look at Donato because the asking price might be cheap. And let's look at some other players that I've already discussed this week. Jake Evans, I think he would be a good ad for the Devils, but the problem is that the Canadians are trying to package both Jake Evans and Joel Armia, and that might be too steep of a price for the Devils. And for Kyle Palmieri, I think he would be a good ad for the Devils as well. And I do like reunions, as you guys know. I was a big fan of the Devils reuniting with Stefan Nason and Tomas Tatar over the summer. I wouldn't mind Palmieri coming back to New Jersey, but the only issue is that you got Lou Lamoriello, who runs an iron fist, and he's probably going to demand a little bit more from the Devils because I don't think he's going to be dumb enough to trade Palmieri for the down low to a rival. We know how Lamoriello likes to operate. He used to operate the Devils, and I don't think he's changed all that much. So getting Kyle Palmieri might be a tall order, but I think Donato, yes, he's gaining a lot of interest from other teams, but maybe the Devils can try to entice the Blackhawks a little bit. I'm eyeing those picks and maybe a low-end prospect. Don't break the bank, but be smart. Donato, great player who can contribute on the bottom 6 for New Jersey. And does he put him over the edge? I mean, I think the Devils will be better. They'll have more options up and down their lineup. And I think that's what it ultimately comes down to. This is what I've been saying ad nauseum throughout the course of this week, which is the Devils are a little too top heavy and they need more consistent scoring on the bottom six. I think Alexander Holtz was a decent contributor on the Devils last year. Yes, he was capable of scoring, but other tangibles to his game needed a lot of work, like his puck handling, his defense. He was sometimes a liability, which resulted in Lindy Ruff benching him. But the one thing I can't take away from Holtz was that he was a pretty decent scorer, and that did give the Devils some more options on their bottom six. But for players like Eric Haula, who hasn't scored in a few months, if you could believe it. Tomas Tatar is just getting older. He wasn't the player that he was a few years ago. Nathan Bastian, I don't know what else to say about him, but I'm going to steer clear of that. Nathan Bastian, I think we all know, needs to step up his game. Curtis Lazar has been a healthy scratch the past couple of outings, so I'm a little curious to see what might happen to him. Paul Cotter, he's good when it comes to physicality, but scoring, tough to come by, despite getting off to a really hot start. And Dawson Mercer, I know people can have their own opinions on Mercedog, but this season, he has appeared in 60 games. He has 13 goals, 12 assists for a grand total of 25 points. I would trust Mercer to score more often than the other players I just listed. But Mercer does need to elevate his game a little bit more. I can't deny it, but I don't think the Devils should just trade him away for a rental piece. But let me know your thoughts. Who do you think the Devils should pursue come to trade deadline? Who are you willing to part ways with? That's what I'm extra curious to know about. So leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast streaming service. Hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day, New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.